Reinvent yourself. Welcome to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia. The opportunity to live in a permanent state of reinvention and change as change happens. A space for human potential, action, holistic high performance, ultra productivity, experimental lifestyle, unstoppable attitude, disruptive mindset, coaching and self-discipline as a lifestyle, modern stoicism, impact marketing, connected leadership, and whatever comes next.
We tell stories when the truth is too painful to talk about directly. This is a quote from our next guest, our next disruptor. And as I'm talking in English, you guess it, is an international, worldwide disruptor. Today, in Disrupt Everything podcast series, we have David Perell. David, welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we have a master of turning ideas into action, into writing, a master of writing, which is, for me at least, the most divine skill we've been given by, maybe we steal to God, so maybe they gifted to us. But this is an essential component, an essential skill in the disruptive skill set. Disrupt yourself is a way to reinvent ourselves. Then we can disrupt everyone. Welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series. It is a place for interviews, stories, and life experiences about ruckus makers, worldwide leaders, disruptors, high performers, and that are disrupting themselves and disrupting everything. It's a space for dissecting and deconstructing human potential. Also for deconstructing and dissecting life mastery and modern wisdom. It's also a place for exponential growth, self-mastery, disruptive mindset, technology, entrepreneurship, unstoppable attitude, holistic performance, personal reinvention, life hacking, productivity, self-discipline, peak experiences, lifestyle experiments, and standing out, mainly. It started in 2017, and we are currently on episode 211. And now we have a very interesting guest who was recommended to me by another guest, and I will tell you more after the intro. So let's disrupt everything.
Find the risk before the risk finds you. You're listening to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia.
David Perell runs a writing school called Rite of Passage, a 5 weeks online course of intense instruction where David gives hundreds of students the tools to publish their ideas. Also to build an online audience and accelerate their career. David is a prolific writer. His essays cross between topics like travel, culture, media, marketing, and technology. And nevertheless, the majority of his essays orbit around our relationship with information, especially how we make sense of the world by consuming ideas. In addition, each week, and this is very, very, very interesting and very recommended to all of you, David writes 2 popular emails. One is Monday Musings, a collection of the coolest things David learned every week, and Friday Finds, a links-only newsletter where he only shares the kind of ideas you won't find anywhere else. You can find also his essays in Perell.com. We will put all the links and resources and interesting persons that are mentioned in the podcast show notes. David is on a mission to teach thousands of people to write online, share their ideas, and build an online audience. Beyond the world of writing, he hosts 2 podcasts. Not one, but 2. One where he does the talking and one and one where he does the interviewing. The Rite of Passage podcast is a collection of deep dives into the writing process. Meanwhile, the North Star podcast is a collection of almost 100 or more than 100 interviews with all kinds of high performers, including Kevin Kelly, Seth Godin, who were also in this podcast, Ryan Holiday, Erika Nardini, Tyler Cowen, Matt Mullenberg, Neil deGrasse Tyson, James Clear, and Jason Fried, one of the biggest performers in the world out there. I connected with David, as I was saying, thanks to a personal recommendation from a friend, Fran Blake, ex-CEO of Home Depot, who recommended me interviewing David. It would be a nice idea, he said. Then I researched about him and his work, and bingo, here we are. David, thank you for being in this Disrupt Everything podcast series. And how does it feel when you have such a prolific project, life project?
Well, I think that I was talking about this last night, you just have a sense of the different buckets in your life, whether they're relationships, work, craft, health, and every single one you're trying to push the limits on. You're trying to say, okay, what does the next frontier look like for me? And thinking through different feedback loops. Patrick O'Shaughnessy, who runs a podcast called Invest Like the Best, has this line that I really like called learn, build, share, repeat. And I think that that's a way that I live my life too, going out, trying to find great information, trying to synthesize it, trying to digest it, and then going from a place of learning to a place of building, actually taking action in the world and try to create something. And then as you do that, you begin to synthesize and digest things for yourself, and you begin to share those things. And I like build because part of that is building a company. And so for me, that's Rite of Passage. That is an education company that's totally devoted to writing online. But then part of that is the act of building an idea, which is what we do whenever we write. And so both of those I'm doing every single day. My mornings are devoted to the writing. My afternoons are devoted to the company. And all of that is devoted to sharing with writing, thinking not just about writing for myself, but writing for an audience. And with building, once again, thinking not just building for myself, but building a company that'll impact the lives of other people.
It really, I read something about, you said that really grabbed my attention, really impacted me, which is writing is not the byproduct of deep thinking. It's where deep thinking actually happens. Does this have something to mean with the essential process in our life, which is integration?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love that idea that like so much of what we're doing when we're writing is we have this sense of an idea. It's like a seed, and you find that thing, and it can be a phrase, it can be a one-liner, it can be whatever. It can be an argument that you're trying to make, a thesis like we learned in school. And then somehow you feel this uprising moving through your intuition, and it's a feeling, a hunch, a sense that you have that there's something to explore there, that idea has a kind of magnetic attraction to it, and you follow it. And what happens is we basically, like a computer, like humans are like computers in this particular way, where you have your working memory and then you have sort of like your long-term storage. And so for computers, there's like memory and then there's RAM. And what happens is when you write, so let me start. When you think, everything has to stay in your working memory because you're thinking about something, you're working through a problem, and as you work on something new, you still have to remember what you were thinking about before. And, if you ever watch like a mathematician work out a hard problem, they don't sit there and think. what they do is they get a piece of paper or a whiteboard and they start writing. They start putting stuff, externalizing their ideas and putting them, basically hanging them, freezing the frame of thought. And by doing that, they're basically saying, I've taken care of this. And if I need to reload that information in my brain, I always can. But now what I'm essentially doing is I'm taking units of my cognitive energy and I'm outsourcing it to the page. And then with those extra units, I can now think deeper about what's going on here. And so the reason why writing helps us think is two things. The first is that it gives us more working memory to work with because we can actually put stuff down on paper. And then the second is that our ideas freeze. And you'll know from, if you've ever practiced meditation or something like that, the brain skips, the brain likes to jump. It's almost like moving on lily pads on the top of a water surface when there's so much going on below. There's animals and there's life and there's plants and maybe little snakes down there. The only thing worse than seeing them is knowing that they don't exist and all of a sudden they chop off your leg or something. And so what we do when we write is we actually go into the underworld of consciousness and we bridge the intuitive self with the rational self, what we feel and what we can articulate. And then as we come back up to the surface, we see that like a tree isn't just what's above the ground. There's actually a whole root structure that we can only explore once we put ideas onto the page.
David, does this means like the more we write and the more we get deeper with the writing, the more capacity of our brain and memory and cognitive power can we use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And that is what the work is that you're doing whenever it is that you write. Every day when I sit down, I always feel like I'm on this outer edge of what I can achieve, which is I know enough that I know that I can go there, wherever there is. But I don't know so much that there is clear. Right? It's almost like driving on a foggy road on the highway. It's like where the next 20 feet are. Sometimes it goes up to 60 feet. Sometimes it goes 10 feet. Sometimes you go, I got to skirt around. I actually went the wrong direction. And then it's only after you get to your destination that you can actually look back and say, okay, now if I were to do this again, how would I do it more efficiently? What's great is we actually do this all the time when we talk. I'm doing it right now. You're going to do it on this podcast. The next time anyone who's listened to this, they're doing the same thing. Speaking is sort of like driving on a foggy road. The difference, though, between speaking and writing is that speaking, you only get one shot. You get to your destination and it's over. Somebody else says, okay, now I'm going to start driving. With writing, you can get to your destination, go back to the beginning and start over. Go back to the beginning and start over. And that's what we call editing. And so some kinds of writing, this is very practical writing. You're trying to basically create the most efficient way for somebody to get from the origin to the destination. And then there's more artistic writing where now you're trying to take the scenic route or something. And so actually efficiency goes from a virtue to a vice, a strength to a weakness. And what you're trying to do is take the reader on an aesthetic journey and have them enjoy that experience. They still get to the destination, but rather than going on the highway with all the ugly buildings and the advertisements, you're taking them down the nature trail where there's a beautiful beach on the side of the road or something like that.
I want to go back and ask you, if you were about to put your life in a timeline, which it is, what would be your top life highlights and milestones so far?
Yeah, I think there's a few. One of my favorite stories is I didn't do very well in school. And so as I was beginning to graduate from high school and move into college, I had horrible grades. And so I needed to find something that would work. And I was a decent golfer. And so I said, hey, I'm going to really give golf my all, focus on this. And I remember sitting in my room one night looking up schools throughout all of America that were a Division I golf program, which is like the elite level of golf. And the reason that that's important is because those schools can get a lot more funding to athletic programs, which means that the coaches of those schools have a lot more influence and sway over the admissions department compared to like a Division 2 or a Division 3. But at the same time, they couldn't be such a good school because I was only mediocre. And so what I did was I emailed the coaches of a few schools that I was interested in applying to. I remember Gardner Webb, High Point, Elon University. And so I remember emailing the coach at Elon and saying, hey, let's do a meeting. So it's this fall afternoon, cold, windy, and I have a 6 p.m. meeting with him, and I show up and he's not at his office. And I've flown across the country for this meeting. I mean, this is my one chance to get into a good school. And in America, going to a good college is like how your parents think of themselves, of like, how well did I do as a parent? As a kid, it's like you spend 2 decades of your life trying to get into a good school. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it is a big cultural thing. And so he's not there. And so I'm like, uh-oh, what do we do? Flown across the country for this. And so I look at my dad, he's with me, and I go, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drive to every single golf course around the university. So we go to Indian Valley Golf Course, they're not there. We go to Stony Creek Golf Course, they're not there. And we try the last one that's close, Alamance Country Club. And we're driving up the road as you get in. The 10th hole, I see these maroon golf bags and all these guys. And I'm like, stop the car. That's them. And so he, slams on the brake, and I get right out of the car. I walk out. I talk to this guy and I say, hey, my name is David. I'm here as a golf recruit. I'm from California. I've flown across the country for this. Where is the coach? I need to get a hold of him. He goes, hey, let me call him. And so I get on the phone and so I'm like, hey, I'm David. He goes, oh, David, I forgot about you. His name's Bill Morningstar. Bill Morningstar is how he calls himself. And so he says, oh, be back at the golf den in 30 minutes. We talk for an hour and a half. He calls me a week and a half later and says, hey, you're in as a golf recruit. And that to me is such a highlight because it's the kind of thing, like the kind of opportunity that you have to make that was waiting there, made a huge difference in my life. I ended up going to school there. And I think was one of those things that looking back at life made me realize that opportunities aren't always presented to you. They're often made. And they're not made in this crazy way, but they're made through a sense of ownership and creativity and a little bit of cleverness to basically say, okay, I'm very close. Now, how do I get this over the finish line? And I often think of that experience whenever I'm trying to make something happen in the world.
And what was the opportunity that you have made that you feel most proud of in after that?
Yeah. I mean, I just think constantly the project of Rite of Passage, the writing school that I'm building, is an answer to this question. If you were to think, okay, what can a writing school be that's founded by somebody with an audience in this day and age, this cohort-based course time, and it's a 5-week course run on the internet? Most people would say, okay, that's basically some grift run by some influencer who's just trying to sell back what he's creating. And, okay, you're just going to run a course, but like, really, what do you want to do with your life? I've had a lot of people say that. Really, what do you want to do with your life? You're not going to be doing this in a while. Like, this is just the first thing. And I'm like, hell no, this is exactly what I want to be doing, because a course is the wedge into creating a serious education company. Like the next big education companies, I think, are courses right now. And it's going to take some time, but that's something that I see clearly. It's something I'm believing. Our team will be 15 to 20 people by the end of the year, and watching that come together, watching Rite of Passage grow into something more than just a cohort-based course, more than just 5 weeks for a bunch of adults who want to come together twice a year, to now launching a program for high schoolers, eventually doing something with business writing. I think that this whole project is about looking at how the internet has altered the economics and the delivery of education. It has taken education from being something that's local and super expensive to something that's global and fairly cheap to deliver. And the change brought on by that shift, by that single change in the variable of local and expensive to global and cheap, I think I'll spend the better part of the next decade or more really thinking through the implications of what that means.
It's a powerful shift in the way we grow, in the way we do business, in the way we live. And I'm really highlighted that the courses are the next company educations. That's very, very powerful, and that's a good way to see how to evolve from course to education company, right?
Yeah.
David, how did you find that writing was your gift?
I don't think it's my gift at all. And I think that that's part of the reason I do this. I was a terrible writer growing up. I basically read none of the books for all of elementary school, all of middle school, all of high school. I remember reading a book called Sula by Toni Morrison, like my junior year of high school. And I think it was legitimately the first book in my entire life in school that had been assigned to me that I actually read. And then even in college, I didn't read any of the stuff that was assigned to me for the first couple of years. Actually, my junior year of college, there was a professor, and she was known for being tough, but I'd heard through the grapevine that her classes were good. So it's my junior year, I'm 20 years old, and I walk into her office and I say, all right, tell me about this class, some philosophy class that you're teaching. I want to hear about it. And she's like, well, we're going to go through the history of Western philosophy. We're studying this person, this person, this person. I'm like, cool. Okay. So like how much reading, how much writing is it going to be? She's like, well, you're going to have to read at least 20 to 40 pages every night. And then the only way you can come into class is if you write 750 words before, reflecting on what you read the night before, and then you can come in. We'll have a discussion about that every day. She goes, this is amongst the most reading and writing intensive classes at the university. I stand right up, look at her in the eye. I say, your class isn't for me. Thank you very much. And I leave. Something changed during that year. I ended up taking another class with her a year later, and it was the best class I took my entire college time. And I think that that's why I do what I do. I think it's really easy to, if you're good at something, it's really easy to say, hey, this is what I do. But like a lot of what it is that you're doing is a gift. It is something that comes naturally to you. For me, those are things like maybe speaking or certain aspects of leadership or something like that. Or like hand-eye coordination. Like I have decent hand-eye coordination, and like, I don't know how you would teach that. I have no idea. Like that just comes naturally. But writing is something that didn't come naturally at all. Even my first job, I got laid off 3 weeks after my boss told me that writing was one of my biggest weaknesses. And so the reason that I do what I do is because it's not a gift. Because I've been there. I've been just like people who struggle to write, who struggle to get their ideas on paper, who have writer's block, who don't know how to structure their ideas, who don't have anyone in their lives who they can talk about ideas with. So then they have no sense for which ones of their ideas are actually worth sharing and which ones are totally obvious. And those challenges, those dilemmas are things that I had to work through in my own life. And the reason I share them with other people is because I came up with strategies to compensate for my lack of a gift. And so I brought all those together into what I teach.
Then how do you train this no gift every day? Do you have any special system or process?
Yeah, totally. So the first thing is time. Like the time that you spend at the keyboard really matters. And so I'm up at 5 a.m. and getting going to write just so that I can spend that time in a place of deep work before the world wakes up and the pings come in. And so that is a huge part of my process. I've also written a newsletter called Monday Musings every single Monday for more than 4 years now. And it is that training. I've never missed a Monday, not once. And it is that training, that consistency, that discipline that keeps the ball rolling. And all of a sudden you look back and you realize that you've become a better writer. But then I think that when I try to break down the system into 3 different pillars, it's writing from conversation, writing from abundance, and writing in public. And so writing from conversation is this idea that there's your writer brain and there's your friend brain. And often when you're in writer brain, you're sitting down at the computer and all of a sudden you're trying to sound smart. You're trying to write loquacious prose or something like that, where every single thing that you say has to be perfect. Otherwise you can't even go to the next line. And all of a sudden you're in this stuffy state of consciousness where you can't even have fun. Whereas when you're hanging out with your friends, you're sitting at the bar, you put your feet up on the table, you're like, dude, come on. What are you talking about? You're sort of just riffing. And actually that, in that state of riffing, that state of having fun, that's actually when your really good ideas come out. So the first thing that helped me was this idea of writing from conversation. You and I are going to have a chat and we're going to see where things go. But you know what? By the end, I have a sense that in an hour and a half, I'm going to actually say something that's pretty interesting that you think is interesting. And then in my next chat, I'm going to bring that thing up again. And if 2 people think that thing is interesting, hey, I actually might be onto something. But then a lot of the other ideas that, hey, I thought that was really interesting, you're like, it's kind of obvious. I don't really have much to say about that. So that's writing from conversation. The second is writing from abundance. Rather than sitting down and looking at that blank white page of doom, that flashing cursor that's just waiting there, it's what do I write? No, take a bunch of notes throughout your life. I'm always taking notes. I'm always capturing my own observations. I'm walking through cities and I literally, I don't take the subway. I won't take an Uber. I will literally go on a 30-minute walk and I will have to write 1,000 words of notes just on my impressions of the city. What's the architecture like? What's the vibe of the people? And what are the smells of the city? Always taking those notes. And then once I sit down, I see that there's so many things that were so obvious to me in that moment that I would have forgotten about had I not captured them. And so that way, by writing from abundance, by taking notes, I'm actually aiding my future writing process. And then the final thing is this idea of writing in public. Whenever we're taught to write, we write for one person, the teacher, and we spend all this time working an assignment, we hand it in, we get a bunch of red scribbles at the end. Hey, this could have been better. Hey, this could have been worse. You get one big grade and then you throw that piece of paper in the trash and nothing happens with it ever again. Whereas the way that I think about writing is, no, share your ideas in public, actually put them out into the world, and some interesting things are going to happen. You're going to attract people on your intellectual wavelength who are going to want to talk about those ideas with you. You're going to find people who want to give you career opportunities, who want to work with you. There's going to be all these things that come to you that happen once you share your ideas in public. I can't tell you what they're going to be, but if you have an audience and you're writing well, your writing is of quality, some really cool things are going to happen.
When you mean in public, writing for in public, you mean putting out there in the internet?
Yep, exactly. And crazy stuff happens. I was talking to a girl last week. Her name's Rachel. She'd never been on a sailboat in her life. Lives in North Carolina and was just feeling a little down and dejected about her future career-wise. And she read this memoir about sailing. And she's like, wow, I'm really moved by this. I'm going to write a letter to the author. So she does it. And the author reads this letter. It's probably a couple hundred words and goes, my goodness, this is fantastic. The author has connections at this sailing magazine called Latitude 38. And all of a sudden, it gets published. She gets hundreds of messages from around the world. Come on my boat. Hey, I'm doing a trip to the Bahamas. Come on the sailboat. Hey, I'm doing Mediterranean week after. Come over. More than 100 responses for different people who want her to come on the boat. And I think that this is what is magical about writing. You're tapping into these micro communities. You're finding people that you would never be able to find in your own life. I mean, she lives, I think, in Wilmington, North Carolina. I don't know how big the number of obsessive sailors there are, but it's not nearly as big as the number of people who read this Latitude 38 magazine. And that's the sort of stuff that I try to help people do, is actually get those ideas out, get them into the world so that you can make something happen. And you don't know what that thing is going to be, but that's what I call serendipity. It is going to be things that almost feel like magic and uncanny in retrospect.
Discipline has helped you to become a prolific and effective writer. What else has given you discipline, and how discipline in writing has helped other people that work with you?
Yeah, I think that a big thing is, so I'll take two questions. So the first is cultivating a sense of taste. I think about this a lot. And a lot of my reading increasingly is just about trying to get into the minds of writers who I think are excellent and try to understand what is it that they do. I've been learning about a writer, historian, novelist named Shelby Foote. And he wrote a couple novels, but in America, he's sort of the foremost scholar of the Civil War, which happened in the middle of the 19th century. And what's interesting about his Civil War documentation is how much it's cloaked in this narrative. And what he did was, even though he was this historian, I mean, he also wrote some novels, he had read through Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past like 9 times cover to cover. And in this video, you look at his book and it's just covered with scribbles of him trying to make sense of what is Proust doing in this novel. And I think that that is a lot of what I'm trying to do, is ask myself, who are the people who I want to emulate? Who are the people who know something about the craft that I don't? And how can I study their work, both to get the felt experience of, okay, what is it like to consume this, but then also to deconstruct what's going on. Why is it that with the way that the words, the sentences, the paragraphs, how is it in the way that they're organized that creates this pleasant reader, or this pleasant experience for the reader? And then how do I recreate that in my own writing? And then to your other question about work itself, I think a lot of what we're trying to do when we're running a company is write things so that they're not in somebody's head. If something's in your head, there's this concept called bus factor, which is basically like how many people in your company can get hit by a bus and have something be a disaster versus how many could get hit by a bus and have nothing happen. Now, of course, you don't want anybody to get hit by a bus. It'd be terrible. But it's a great concept to say, hey, like, I don't actually want to be a bottleneck in this company. I need to get my ideas out. I need to write them. Because ultimately, what you're doing when you build a company is you're trying to build a manual and an operating system for how you make decisions. And you try to coin those in terms and phrases and stories to have them become company lore so that everybody, tens, hundreds, thousands of people, can begin to embody your perspective and at the very least make decisions in the way that you would have made them. The company that does this best is Amazon. What Jeff Bezos did was he coined certain phrases like it's always day one. What is that? It's always day one is this idea within the company that they're always going to be moving forward, innovating, and that even if they are in $1 trillion company, that it's still always day one. They're still in the early stages. They're continuing to improve. And it's phrases like that that have made Amazon a really special company. And it's why Amazon will see. But I think that out of any company of this era, they're best positioned to have the CEO leave and continue to thrive afterwards, because his concepts, his thinking is so well encoded into the company. I mean, actually the clearest one, the best example of this is put the customer first. Put the customer first. And that's everything from, there's this old video of him in a 60-minute show where he's working on the desk, but the desk isn't a desk that he bought. It's like an old door that he got, and he's literally working on it, has his computer there. He's a multi-millionaire, and I think he actually might even be a billionaire. I'm not sure. And he's driving like this this Honda car that's so lame. And so stories like that, he's trying to say, hey, we value frugality. And then there's other stories of him just being ruthlessly focused on the customer. What do they need? What do they need? We're going to do whatever it is. And now this is why buying from Amazon rocks. It's like, hey, if you don't like something, you can return it, no questions asked. And this is how he's been able to, he's not making all those decisions. He actually has hundreds of thousands of people who are thinking like Bezos and adopting his mentality, which I think is as close to brilliance as you can get on this planet.
And so that's the importance of putting into the stories, putting into words so people can relate, right?
Yeah.
David, so about writing, how can, because you've been guiding people from zero to hero, right? That's the one thing I had in mind. Like, what strategy and tactics can someone use to go from zero to hero when writing online, when it's so crowded, when everybody's going for the clickbait, when like everybody's using the same patterns, sometimes even like tricks which are to more to manipulate than to create attention marketing, as Seth Godin said, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that you have to start thinking about who are the readers that you want. And there are, of course, all kinds of tricks that you can have, but the problem with using those is you don't get the readers that you want. And if you don't get the readers that you want, you don't get the people that you want in your life. And I've always liked the idea of a Pyrrhic victory. And this goes back to the time of the Greeks or the Romans. And it means that you won the battle, but you lost the war. And I think that the battle that you're asking about is, how do you build an audience? How do you make more money? How do you get a bunch of people to know about your name? But the war is, what's the quality of the people in your life? Are you working with dignity and honor? And do you feel a sense of self-respect for the work that it is that you're doing? Do you look at yourself in the mirror every morning and say, hey, I'm proud of what I'm doing. This is in alignment with my values, the person who I want to be, what it means to be a great human being? Or is it out of alignment with that? And I think that you just want to make sure that winning the battle doesn't mean that you're losing the war, because that puts you in a dark place long term.
How do you do that? Have you been in such a dark place and you realize that? And how do you carry this virtuous path when writing? It's so tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I think that it requires an awareness for how you feel when you read other writers and checking in with that. So if you feel frustrated by somebody when they write, what is it? Is it the cheap tricks? Is it the scammy promotion? What is it? You clearly have a respect and an admiration for Seth Godin. So what's behind that? I was thinking about this yesterday. I have that same respect for Seth Godin. Like, what is it about Seth Godin that makes him so admirable? And as I was working through this yesterday, I was thinking, okay, so one of the big things is there's a sheer volume to his work that makes it delightful. Also, you're getting something every day. So he feels like a friend. He feels like a part of your routine for years. Okay, so that's sort of the first bucket. The second bucket is you get the sense that he's trying to teach you first and sell you second. Seth Godin absolutely sells products. He's made a fortune in his career. But he's teaching you first. He's not hiding the fact that he's selling products. He's not shying away from it. But he's not leading with that. And then I think the other thing is he assumes that the reader is smart. Not in a way that is stuffy or pretentious or over the top, but in a way that you get when, like, a grandfather sits you down and goes, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's have a chat. And the grandfather believes in you and starts forcing you and probing you to think in a more mature way, to ask, okay, what is it that you're really doing over there? And I think that combination of being prolific, teaching before selling, and then assuming that the reader's smart in a way that invites them to think is why we both share that affinity for Seth Godin. And so as I then think about my own writing, what is it that I want to do? What are the things I want to push for? Seth is absolutely one of those people who I admire. And then you can take bits and pieces of those people that you admire, build your own wall of heroes, and somehow become the synthesis of all those people. And then you end up doing work that you're proud of, which is really the war that's worth winning.
Mm-hmm. How do you take notes? You say that you take a lot of notes. As I see it, is a non-stop integration of everything that's happening, right? What's the best way for you to take notes? What's the most helpful for you?
I think that there's a couple ways that I would answer this. So the first is taking notes from yourself, and then we'll talk about taking notes from other people, because you really want a combination of both. So with taking notes from yourself, one of the things I do is I use an app called Otter, Otter, otter.ai. And what I love about Otter is their voice transcription is incredible. So it allows me to go for a walk. And if I'm trying to work through a problem, what I do is I'll open up Otter, I'll just go for a mindless walk and try to get my head into a state of consciousness that is sort of like that late night state where you're just sort of talking, but you're not even thinking. And the reason that I'm doing that is I'm trying to see what comes out. And I'm trying to work through ideas. It's fine if I repeat myself. And then what I'll do is I'll have a text file and I'll transfer that over to my computer and I'll just look at it. I'll rearrange things. I'll delete the vast majority of it. And then I'll kind of structure it into something that works. And I'll take, 10,000 words worth of transcription and I'll bring it down into 250 words. And so what I'm doing there is capturing my own ideas and working through this process of distillation to find the main point. Then I always have notes open on my phone where I'm just capturing ideas. So if I open up my notes from just from recently is, things, just little notes, right? It felt like a dream where you can't remember any of the details. So I thought that line was nice. I came up with that while I was working out. This note of geo arbitrage, soft networks, getting a job, like this sentence, by putting your ideas out into the world, you're systematically attracting like-minded people who you might be able to work with in the future. And so what I'm doing is I'm writing those between sets at the gym, and I'm just sort of getting them out of my head. I have these bursts of clarity, and I'm just trying to write things out. And then the other thing is capturing ideas from other people. If you go onto YouTube and just type in Smart Sync Workshop, my friend Tiago Forte and I made this workshop about how you can actually capture the ideas in your life. And what I recommend is you read through an app called Instapaper. You then connect that with an app called Readwise. And what happens is every single time you highlight something, and you should only highlight 1 to 5, 10% of what you read, a small fraction of the things that are most insightful, but Kindle's the same way. And then all the things that I highlight automatically get saved into my note-taking system. And that's really helpful because then when I need to go back to something, rather than going back to the article, I can just find it in the note-taking system, which saves me a bunch of time.
Hando, you were talking about shifting your state of consciousness. First is how do you work being aware and having a decent and aware and ready to go state of consciousness? Because do you work on spiritual practices? You work on meditation? Do you work in any awareness, different practice?
I don't do a lot of those sorts of things. What I get a lot of value from is lifting weights and walking. And those times where I can do both of those are big relaxing reset for me. I need time to think and also need time to just get energy out. I think that one of the big mistakes that we've made is how much we've separated the mind from the body. I think the ancient Greeks are very right. If you go to the Louvre, if you go to the Met, and you look at the Greek sections, you find these bodies that are just magnificent, perfectly sculpted, beautiful abs, beautiful bodies. And the Greeks worshipped both the mind and the body. And they saw that a beautiful body actually enabled a beautiful mind. And what happened was, I think, beginning with this idea of mind-body dualism that comes out 15th, 16th century, something like that, we began to think of the mind and the body as being separate. And so I think that working through with the body can really help the mind. And I think a lot about that and am very committed to fitness in that way. And then the other thing is I just sleep a lot. Like I sleep a bunch. I take a nap every day. Sometimes I'll take 2 naps in a day if I'm working through really hard problems. And I block out nap time on my calendar. So that when I begin the week, there are nap times. And like even before a podcast like this, I'm always napping because I know that once I come out of a nap, I'm in a state of serious freshness. And that's another thing that I do to stay in a strong mental state. What I want to do is be on when I'm on, but then be on for less time. My friend Austin Reef says that every successful founder has 2 modes: run through a brick wall and laying on a beach and doing nothing. And I think that that's very true for high performers. And that's something I'd like to emulate because it's a real constant amongst high performers I've seen.
Do you have any special recipe that you have followed for building a community online that you can share with us?
I think that the most important thing is to just attract the right people. And a magnet is a very good analogy because a magnet doesn't just attract, it also repels. And the repels is just as important as the people that you attract. And so I think that when you build a community, we live in this age of, inclusivity, invite everybody. And that's terrible advice for building a community. A community, you should kick the people out who shouldn't be there. If somebody is breaking the rules, you should be very hard on them and say, hey, that's not tolerated here. And if you have the courage to do that, you're going to build a much better community. And what I believe is that if you're putting your ideas out into the world, you're going to attract people who are closer and closer on your filter and on your wavelength. And then it's just about saying, hey, when in doubt, kick them out, as I've heard before. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I have a business partner, my co-founder, Will Mannon, is phenomenal at building community. And so my other piece of advice is find someone who's really good at it, who has it come naturally to them, and just allow them to do whatever they want, and they'll find the answers. He's really good at it.
Do you have any suggestion to write clearly and straight to the point? Because one of the things I notice from your writings and for the work you do is that are concise, are straight to the point, are synthesized. And that really, like it was something like I was very curious about it.
Writing is thinking and rewriting is rethinking. And the way that you improve ideas, the way that you become a better writer is not by writing more. It is by rewriting more. And it's in that rewriting where you take something and you make it shorter, you make it more concise, you make it more dense. And by doing that, you get what you're talking about, where the ultimate goal of writing and editing is fundamentally, if you're trying to, for nonfiction, is just to say more with less. That's it. Say more with less. And so if you can have that as your North Star, you could say, okay, I got 1,000 words here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this to 500. Now I'm going to rewrite it to 300. Now I'm going to rewrite it to 100, put it in a phrase and call it done. And so that process of distillation, of compression is super useful. That's a lot of what we're doing as writers. But the other thing that I think is very interesting, and a lot of how I think about writing, is what are the things that you can do to become a better writer that are counter to what you learned in school? Because if what you learned in school worked, then you'd already be a good writer. So doubling down on all the stuff that you've learned is not going to work out. And if you are somebody who went to school and you said, hey, you know what? Writing worked really well for me. I'm a great writer based on all the stuff I learned. Great. We're talking about attraction and repelling. You're not part of my community, not because you're not invited, because you're not going to like it. But so what I try to do is I try to think, what are the things that come naturally to us? And what's really interesting is how good we are at compressing something when we're speaking. So if I were to say, you're on Ibiza right now, explain Ibiza to me, what's it like in 2 minutes? I'll start a countdown, and you'll do it minute 58. Might do a fine job. If I say 45 seconds, say all the same stuff, all the most important stuff in 45 seconds, you can do it. I'll now give you 20 seconds to do it. You can do it. And what I think is really interesting is that compressing through speech comes naturally to people. Compressing through writing is extremely daunting. So if you need to compress, just use a timer, speak out into your phone, whatever it is that you're trying to say, and you'll actually go through those modes of compression in a way that's much more aligned with what's easy to you as a communicator, rather than trying to slave away on the page.
What do you usually see as when we write more than we write? It's just because our need to attract, our desire to be liked, approved, because that also is how you write is how you are, right? And because how you talk maybe is more difficult to identify someone, but how you write explains and expresses most real deep things in yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. A lot of people can't write well because they just don't have the skills or the technique. And then there's a lot of people who are always trying to bring something out of themselves through writing that they don't ordinarily bring out. And that's a lot of what I work on, is trying to ask, like, how can I find things within myself that are deeper than what I'm finding when I'm thinking, deeper than what I'm finding in conversation, deeper than what I'm writing when I'm just typing? Like, how do I actually find those parts of myself? And I think that the self, when it comes to writing, is actually very fragmented. And often when you work on a piece, you found 1/1,000,000th of yourself. But it's actually that 1/1,000,000th is like that tree root that we were talking about earlier, that is so much deeper than you've ever gone. And that is a lot of just what I'm trying to do with a piece. If I can find that one thing, then it becomes a successful piece.
What system do you follow to read books? And how about for integrating them into your daily experience?
Yeah, I think it depends on the book. There's certain books that I find where I'd call them problems.
I think David, it has gone mute.
Good?
Sorry. Yes.
No, all good. So I didn't answer that. Or did it just go mute halfway through?
Before you were starting to answer.
Oh, interesting. So with books, I think that it's a little bit different, because there's certain books that I read to enjoy myself. There's certain books that I read to solve a problem. And so the ones to solve a problem, very systematic, where what I'm doing is I'm reading, like right now I've been reading The Great CEO Within by Matt Machari, because I want to figure out, how do I become an executive? I've now have double-digit people on my team. Like, what do I need to do? What are the systems I need to build? How do I need to talk to people? What do I do when I get angry? What do I do when I get stressed? What do I do when I get excited and want to celebrate things? All those sorts of things. And those, I read chapter by chapter and I begin to implement the things that work well for me. Pass along certain things to a team member. Hey, what do you think about this? Hey, let's talk about this. And then there's other books that I'm just reading for fun. And what I'm trying to do is read through certain frameworks to try to deconstruct what are they doing. So for example, I think a lot about this framework that I call pop writing. You want writing to be personal, you want it to be observational, and you want it to be playful. And personal writing means that you're saying something about yourself. And what's great about saying something about yourself is the reader gets a connection with you. But if you go too far saying something about yourself, then it becomes like a memoir and nobody cares. Observational writing, the O in pop writing, is making a point that allows somebody to say, I've never thought about that before. You see something about the world that I don't see. The problem with observational writing is when you only do observational writing without the other P's, your writing gets dry, it gets boring. And the third pillar is playful writing. Playful writing is great because it gives it life. It gives it personality. This is your friend at a bar who's making a joke. This is the person on the internet who has a coined term like FOMO. Everyone knows FOMO, fear of missing out. There's an element of playfulness. The issue with playful writing is if you only do that, then the writing feels cheap. It feels trivial. It's like, who cares? But it's actually in the synthesis of all these things, playful, observational, personal, observational, and playful, that you begin to have good writing. So a lot of what I do when I read is I just look, where is the author using all of those elements? How are they being personal? How are they being observational? How are they being playful? How are they using those different ingredients and bringing them together into their writing? And if I can just keep like a little David filter where it passes through my pop writing filter, I find that over time I end up becoming a much better writer.
Sorry, went again. How do you cook a good start for writing an impactful book, or a piece of content to engage with your readers?
How does it begin?
Sorry, how will you cook a good start for an impactful book or a piece of content for engaging with your readers?
Yeah, well, the beginning is really important. And the beginning is really important. And a lot of what I try to do is just have some kind of hook. So I have a couple different things that I go from, but I think that one of the big ones that I'll do is I'll bring them in with the story. I think that writers like Morgan Housel do this exceptionally well, where they'll say, hey, here's this story that you've never heard of, and you'll be flabbergasted. Oh my goodness, that is a crazy story. You'll read it and you'll want to say, oh my goodness, I want to read more. And then you get to the end of that introduction. It has a hook, almost like a Netflix show or something that says, okay, we're done with episode 1. Now I want to watch the second one. And then the other thing that I often try to do is I try to summarize the entire piece in a paragraph or two. And what I'm trying to do there is basically just get to the essence of what it is that I'm trying to say. And that is the classic mantra from public speaking. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. And of course, you don't want to be that explicit, but it's a really nice framework to work through. And what I find about that is, first of all, you have the title of the piece, then you have that whole first paragraph or that whole first section which summarizes it, and it gives the reader a sense of where they're going, but it can also inspire curiosity. And often I like to just have a question. So it's like, I've given you the answer. It's done. But now let me ask you a question, create this state of curiosity in your mind. And then now what I'm going to do with the rest of this piece is answer that, so that now we have the scaffolding, the support for the main point that I made in the introduction.
What are your, when you follow this framework, does this has any persuasion effect on the audience, or is it same as public speaking, or is you vary or change some things for the writing?
Well, the thing with writing that you don't have or the thing with speaking that you don't have with writing is the ability to enunciate. So as a listener, you're getting something very different from me right now than you are right now. You're getting something very different. And so we can do that as speakers. We can change our cadence. We go faster if we want. And sometimes we can slow things down. With writing, you could do a little bit of that with punctuation. But fundamentally, writing, you have different tools at your disposal. The first is you can perfect what it is that you're trying to say. If we were to read a transcript of this podcast, I'm sure that I could make it say much more in a third or a quarter of the words. But I can't do that when I'm speaking, because speaking, we're always in that first draft. We're always driving through the fog. We're getting to the destination, but we can't actually go back to the origin and say, okay, how do we do that better? And then the other thing with writing is word choice and phrases. And there's so many things, so many ways that you can be more precise in how you say something. And that precision is why it helps to have a big vocabulary, not so that you can show off, but so that you can be precise. That's what's key.
Be precise.
And if you can use those precise words, you can say things that get to a layer of resolution that your reader has never gotten to before.
David, we're going to move to more rapid fire questions.
Great.
As we are heading to the end of the interview. What are your must-read books in your favorite disciplines?
I think that my must-read author is probably René Girard. I did a lecture series on him with my friend Jonathan B. And you can just look up René Girard, David Perell on YouTube, and you'll find it. And Girard was very life-changing in terms of understanding where desire comes from, how society is structured, how to think about differentiation and sameness, and why is it that we want what we want. Girard was transformative. But I say this with a little smile on my face because I wouldn't read Girard. And that's why we made this lecture series, that his books are so hard to parse. And so we wanted something you could watch, that you could listen to understand his main ideas.
Any night routine worth sharing?
No, but my best friend in college, his dad said to me one day, every day starts at 9 the night before. And that it's actually at 9 p.m., not 9 a.m., that you have to start thinking about the next day. You got to start winding down. You got to start preparing. And I always thought there's a lot of wisdom in that.
What's your life-saving gadget so far?
Man, a book. A book. I mean, a book in the iPhone, just I'd say 70 to 80% of my time on my phone is spent reading, learning, consuming information. And the iPhone is either a life preserver or you're on the deck of the Titanic, right? And you're about to sink. And it's really important how you use that thing.
How do you deal with the stress, David?
Working out, going for a walk, and having really good friends.
What kind of workout do you do usually?
Weightlifting.
Any special routine?
Not really. I had one a lot more, but now it's just about getting in there, getting sore, not being on my phone, and leaving when I feel tired.
What's your mechanism or your key for working, living, and enjoying life as much as you possibly can?
Yeah, I think that Usain Bolt is a really good model here. Usain Bolt, I was with a professional track and field runner last week, and I was asking her, what is it like to be in a competition next to Usain Bolt? I mean, the fastest man ever to live. And you watch him even 10 minutes before, and he's smiling, he's having a good time, he's relaxed, he's joking, he's got wide-eyed smile, and he's happy to be there. And there's other people, she was telling me, that it'd be 3 hours before a track meet. They won't even look you in the eye. It's like, calm down. And I think that Usain Bolt, he gets ready to go. He's on the starting block and he's focused. He's as intense as anybody. As my friend once said, the 99% of Usain Bolt is like the most goofy athlete out there. But that 1% that you see when he's serious, he's the most serious of anyone you'll know. And I love that. I love that idea. And you go out, you give it your absolute all, and then you're back in a state of relaxation. I think that that's what it's about. Now, for different jobs, depending on what it is that you do, the amount of time that you want to be serious changes. But I think that having a Usain Bolt approach to excellence could serve us very well.
If you were about to share with us 3 or 4 tools that are irreplaceable in your lifestyle, what would they be?
The iPhone, MacBook, the iPads. Thank you, Apple. And my AirPods. I mean, I live in the other world, but I think all of us are like that. I mean, It is fundamentally irreplaceable. And if you know how to use those tools right, it will change your life in such a positive way. I once met a guy who worked very closely with Bill Gates at Microsoft. I asked him, how's the world changed? He's an investor now. I said, how's the world changed? He said, it used to be that it would be better to be mid-level IQ, born in America. Now he'd rather be high-level IQ, born wherever, because of the way the internet's changed. I said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. He said, the smartest young people now are so much smarter than they were 20 and 30 years ago. And that's because of access to technology and the information abundance that we swim in. But at the same time, we all know that if you're not careful about tweaking the dials on your digital experience, you will get utterly destroyed and end up with intellectual junk that is totally worthless, and you'll just become stupider.
David, final questions. Do you have any sacred principle or untouchable belief that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, that you shouldn't have sacred principles and untouchable beliefs unless you really examine those. I really admire people who do have them. I think that they're looked down upon. And I think that one of the problems with the West right now is that we don't have enough of them. But at the same time, I say that with caution because I'm really scared of people who haven't thought through those sacred and untouchable beliefs and who've just taken them because other people have told them to, and they haven't really examined them from first principles. I'm a huge fan of believing in things. I think it gives you a sense of mission and vitality and meaning and purpose. But please do yourself and the rest of us a favor and examine them before you raise them into untouchable beliefs.
Your career in a headline?
If you write, good things will happen.
Before I die, I must do 3 things.
I think design a home would be a big one. I think do travel writing, have that be another one. And then I would like a time in my life where I can get back to being a scratch golfer.
If you were about to publish and send a message to this audience, which you are going to, what will be your final message to anyone who is listening and watching this video and podcast interview?
Share ideas on the internet. It'll serve you really well if you're proud of them, and just remember that you can win the battle but lose the war. You want to win the war. It's okay to lose the battle in the short term, but it's about winning that war, and share your ideas, but make sure that you're doing them with dignity and a way that makes you proud of what you're doing.
Is there anything else you want to add, David?
Yeah, if you want to check out my work, just look up Friday Finds Links. I have a giant list of links and whatever it is that you're interested in. It's like 50,000 words, this page. It just goes on forever. And it's all the best links that I found in the past 5 years. Friday finds links, and then David Perell. And you'll see them. There's a little email capture at the top. Just enter your email address, and then I'll send you 5 links every single week. And if you're the kind of person who's curious enough to find this podcast, you're gonna love that page.
When is the next cohort for the rite of passage?
We have one October 2022, March 2023. And if you have kids, we're now launching a program for high schoolers called Rite of Passage Liftoff. And so subscribe to my email and you will get information about that if you want your kids to be a part of Rite of Passage and learn to write for the internet.
We will make sure we put all the links in the podcast show notes. David, where people can find you apart from Perell.com? Is there any other social outlet?
It's just that Friday finds links. Sign up for the email, and you'll start learning and getting a bunch of wild and wacky ideas from all over the place.
David, final question for the audience. What will be your question for them?
What's holding you back from expressing yourself creatively?
This is the question. You are invited to answer for yourself in the social networks, in the comments of the podcast, in the website, in the podcast website itself, in YouTube, when you find it, and let us know. David Perell, thank you for participating and sharing with us your gift, which is beyond writing. And thank you for being disruptive. Thank you for disrupting us. And thank you for teaching us how writing and sharing ideas shapes the world.
Thank you for hosting me.
And one of the last quote before we leave is, one of the biggest flaws of our school system is that the majority of students hate reading by the time they graduate. From David Perell. You've been disrupted with David Perell. You can find him in Perell.com. We share and the links. Also check out his podcasts. And this is it. You've been disrupted. And remember that if you don't disrupt yourself, someone or something will come and disrupt you, and that will be not that really, that will be a bit more tricky than disrupting yourself. So thank you, and let's keep dancing with life. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia. You can listen to the podcast on any podcast platform or on isragarcia.s/podcast, where you'll find interviews with Seth Godin, Robin Sharma, Wim Hof, Kevin Kelly, Stephen Kotler, Joseph Ahram, Great Modern Stoics, Zen Masters, Shaolin Masters, Hollywood actors, New World sages, and many other disruptors, plus solo episodes with Isra. And the journey continues.